Next up, we have the cashless debate. My friend Sam Maule is going to be the moderator. And if you've ever heard his podcast on 11FS, fantastic. We're also going to have Omri from Marqeta, May from the Financial Clinic, and Demetra from Square. So let's give a big round of applause for these new speakers. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sam Maule with 11FS, and I'm going to kick this off, and I like that Demetra and I are like bookending this. I'm going to talk all the way across. So it's interesting you're with Square. We're talking about a cashless debate, so we're starting with Square. When you think of Square, when I think of Square, immediately going to innovation around POS and the ability for folks to take cards. And yet, I looked at your site this morning. When you go to Square, you pull up the website, the very first thing you read is, accept every way your customers want to pay. So that's fitting for this white paper that you published called Making Change, which actually talks about this entire debate. So you can talk a little bit about why Square published this paper and what did you find in the journey?
Yeah. So as you said, Square accepts all payments. We accept both cash and credit cards, which is really unique for both the payments provider and the POS we are typically. But with this white paper, so we've been following the cashless narrative for over the last year, and what started as it's hip, it's cool to go cashless for your business, it's going to save you money and time, started to turn towards, well, it's going to contribute to inequality, it's going to leave out the underserved and the unbanked, and it's actually elitist. So we started to see that in all the information that was out there, and also started noticing that there was legislation that was being proposed at a city and state level banning cashless businesses. So a business who chose to go cashless would actually have to go back to accepting cash. And this was based largely on the fact that they felt that the underserved and the unbanked were going to be affected by this. So we took a look at our data, and we also wanted to better understand where we are at as a cashless society. And so we looked at the last 4 years of data, and what we found is we are going towards a less cash society. We are seeing people pull out their cards for smaller and smaller purchases. So 4 years ago, what would have been lunch for someone to pull out a card, now they're pulling out a card for a coffee. So smaller and smaller purchases. So we saw that with our data, but we also wanted to see a different perspective that we weren't seeing in the press or that we were hearing from folks, and that was from the business perspective. Mainly the cashless debate, if you want to call it, has been from the perspective of the consumer and not the business owner. And what we do really well at Square is to put the business at the forefront of a lot of the decisions that we make, and we are constantly out there talking to our business owners. And what we found is that we partnered actually with Harvard on this. We did a study with over 1,000 business owners, and what we found is that an overwhelming majority of them will always accept cash. So 83%, I believe it was. And then we also asked whether they believe the US will be a cashless society. And again, an overwhelming majority of the business owners said no. We also wanted to better understand the impact of the legislation. And it seems like business owners are torn. So 50-50 split on whether the government should regulate the register. So we've heard tons of stories of the benefits and the pitfalls of a cashless society, but we really wanted to understand that, and you'll find this in the white paper, different perspectives from business owners who maybe once were cashless, and now because of the ban, which we talked to a business owner actually in New Jersey who was a cashless owner. Most of the transactions were 80% done with cards, so he decided to go cashless. Who actually ended up having to flip back because of the New Jersey law that was passed. We heard from a baker who, opens up at 3 a.m. and was robbed multiple times and didn't want to have cash on the premises, but because of the New York legislation that's proposed, there's a big chance that they're going to have to go back to a cashless model. So the white paper really goes into the perspective of the business owner. It takes a look at Square data over the last 4 years, both cash and card. It talks about the legislation. And honestly, on Square's perspective, we want what's best for our business owners, and it's hard enough for a business to stay afloat or even open in this day and age, let alone be told how to run their business operationally. But at the same time, From the legislation perspective, we do believe it's a good time to pump the brakes and have a conversation, and the legislation is driving a conversation right now. And so with that being said, I mean, there's a lot to dive into the white paper, and I strongly suggest everybody go take a look. We really tried to show both sides of the register, if you will. But I'd love to hear from May, who's from the Financial Clinic, and kind of your perspective and what you've seen, particularly with the underserved and the unbanked.
Yeah, thank you so much. So the Financial Clinic is a nonprofit organization based in New York City. We serve nonprofit organizations and working poor people, low to moderate income people nationally. And our mission is to build financial security. So we're helping poor communities build their credit. We're helping them save, perhaps for the first time. We're helping them get out of debt. And I get the underlying need to move to a cashless system. The organization, the Financial Clinic, actually has our own fintech platform that scales our mission nationally. So we certainly appreciate that if you stand in the way of modernization, you'll either get run over by it or get left in its wake. The thing that we're particularly concerned about, though, is that both the ethics and the equitability argument that in doing so, in moving to a cashless economy, that you leave 15 to 20 million American households in that wake. And I would also venture to say that it could be unprofitable as well. And so a couple of just really quick illustrations of that. A new American who doesn't have a social security number yet and who pays his taxes with an ITIN, an individual tax identification number. So he can't open a bank account, he can't establish a credit history, and so he has to operate in the cash economy. Or maybe a worker who is holding down 3 jobs, lives in a bank desert, and so saves money actually by visiting their local check casher. And when you factor in the opportunity cost and the investment made in his social networks, it's actually not costing them any money at all. Or a widower who's a year out from bankruptcy, paying for his deceased wife's medical bills, and feels that the most vigilant way to manage his finances is to convert his just above minimum wage paycheck into cash, then pay his rent, and then move the balance of his pay to an envelope system. And then my very last one, we also served an older American whose grandchildren bought her a smartphone and delightfully downloaded her bank's app. But over time, the font just was impossible for her to read. And so before her grandchildren can come and visit again and adjust the settings, she just feels much more comfortable going to her bank and managing her expenses, tracking her expenses in cash. And so we really just core belief that an equitable opportunity to financial services is a social justice imperative.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one thing I'm always curious about, and I say this every year at this conference, is we're not normal people. I mean, we're really not. We are so entrenched in the fintech and the finance space. I haven't had cash on me in, Lord, I actually can't remember the last time I carried cash. How many in the audience actually have cash on you right now? It is Vegas. It doesn't count. Put your hands up.
Not just because you're in Vegas.
It's not a fair question. So Omar, from your standpoint, right, from Marqeta.
Yeah,
right?
so, I mean, first of all, those are really good stories, and they're kind of real human stories, and I think they pull at the heartstrings, and I think we're all here to kind of learn how we can do a better job. I would say, looking at some of your data, looking at some of the data that I've been reading, 70% of Americans do carry cash and use cash on a weekly basis. So cash is not going away anytime soon. I'm reminded of my 6th grade teacher, Mr. Schisler. He dramatically pulled out $1 one day, read the legal tender language, and looked at us in the eye and said, all this is faith. This is just faith that the next person down the line is going to receive it from you and accept it from you. And
so he's a crypto guy, obviously.
What's that?
He's in crypto now.
There is, exactly.
There you go.
But
it's another conference.
Down the road. But what I learned from that is it is faith. It is a kind of ecosystem of these promises, and cash is a very good mechanism for delivering and enabling that ecosystem of promises. But cards, which came around in the 50s and became more popular since then, now accounts for 75% of transactions and volume in the United States retail transactions. So cards is an even better system for this ecosystem of promises. And now you have all this new technology that's kind of taking it to the next level. And I think that's where Marqeta comes in. We are extremely fortunate to have built a platform that powers a good deal of all of these modern card use cases, be they for consumers or for businesses. And as such, we get to see a lot. May and I were talking about this backstage. On any given day, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of developers around the world building new card products on our platform. And to that end, we really do get to see a wide swath of new ideas, people kind of dreaming up new ideas, building those new ideas on the platform, and then trying to scale them. One of which, of course, is the Cash app, which has seen a great deal of success. And so we kind of come to three conclusions about this discussion, which we agree is not much of a debate, but more of a conversation, is number one, technology is here to stay, it's not going anywhere, and cash is here to stay, at least for the foreseeable future. Secondly, it's not evenly distributed. William Gibson, I think it was, the author, said the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And it's not, right? And you look at the demographic charts and the cohorts of who has smartphone penetration in the United States, who has credit card in the United States, who has bank account, and it's not evenly distributed. So I think the real discussion needs to be, here we are, it's Money2020, you're right, we are not normal people with respect to money, we don't see things the same way as everybody else. How do we, as an industry, ensure that as we're building the future, we're actually building it for everyone? So that's how we think about it.
You know, one of the things I find interesting, so I'm the outlier. I live in St. Augustine, Florida, because I'm 53 and I'm focused on retirement. The Valley, right, in New York. So I was, on this whole cashless question, I always come back to, is this like a Philly, New York, San Francisco issue, or does this really go across, when you look across the U.S.? And I saw, Demetra, I saw you shake your head, right? And you guys sit on the data, right? I mean, the solutions you provide go across urban, rural, everything. So you see the actual data.
Yeah, I definitely, I think it's more than just a bi-coastal debate, but we did find that a lot of business owners don't really understand what a cashless society is. Yeah. So that was one thing that we really found. Some folks didn't know about, a lot of folks didn't know about the legislation. To this day, maybe some of you hadn't even heard about the legislation. And so I think that this is a pivotal time for us to be having the conversation, but what more should we be doing? What more should tech be doing? What more should the government, should the government be able to regulate? I think that these are things that we need to be asking ourselves, and May, I'd love to get your perspective too, because I think that there's a lot of there hasn't been a lot of solutions that I've seen, just a lot of understanding what the problem is at this point.
Right, yeah. And inclusivity is in capitalists' best interest, right? There's an amazing statistic from the Financial Health Network that underserved communities, so we're talking both and underbanked and financially insecure, spend $173 billion in fees and interests to use 1.94 trillion in financial services. The communities that I'm serving are spending hand over fist on the products and services, that there is a market. Mm-hmm. There is absolutely a market. And so it's in the financial industry's best interest to build affordable and financially healthy on-ramps for cash communities. And so I would really love for the financial industry to be maybe more LMI curious, right? Low to moderate income, really be curious about about low to moderate income communities, and maybe even adopt a pro-poor mandate. Dahan Schulman said, PayPal said this really so well yesterday, talking about how their mandate as a company was to democratize financial services. And if more fintech companies and if more banks took that on, I feel like we would really be able to make some serious progress. And then if it's not the financial industry and its government, I think you're going to see a lot more band-aids like the legislation. Mm-hmm. But short of that, if we're hopefully thinking a half a step forward, that there should be some maybe version of maybe Section 230 protection for low to moderate income families, or maybe like a fintech sandbox that operates like an on-ramp. And then the second thing I would really advocate for is a seat at the table, and really include low to moderate income families in both the design and the direction of the products and services that can serve as that on-ramp.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I'm very proud of Cash App, which is owned and run by Square. And really, our purpose at Square has been economic empowerment and financial inclusion, and how do we do that? And you look at Cash App, which has done a great job of being able to connect the dots of someone who might not have a bank account. And I see that as progress towards a step forward, but there's obviously more that we can all do. I also see, you see Sweden, who is literally like moments away from being cashless. Why? Like what elements are they getting right? And this is more of a question for Omri, especially since they're also on the forefront of advancement in payments technology. I would just be curious to hear your perspective on that.
Right, so we can look at Sweden for a moment, and I then want to come back to Cash App because I think there's a really interesting story around your previous question. So a much different society with respect to income, with respect to its perspective on capitalism versus socialism. And I think they've also had a huge influx of new immigrants, which are not as cashless as some of the folks who have been there originally. The interesting thing around Cash App and this debate around government versus the markets is if you look at what Cash App has done something that what we used to call the GPR industry tried to do, and you did it in a lot more of an elegant way. So, spoiler alert, I'm going to talk about the GPR industry for a second. Not such a great way, but if you think about the GPR value proposition originally was all about the underbanked. Right? And you've been hearing folks about we're going to provide financial services to the underbanked, we're going to bring them into the ecosystem of digital payments, but it was very expensive. Right? Several dollars a month to hold a card. You had to pay just to load cash on a card if you had the cash. And then the government stepped in. CFPB stepped in. You had overdraft protection. You had a 1,700-page rule book around how you manage these products. And then what happened next? Cash App came in and made it all free. And made it all fully digital. And made it all in a way you didn't even need a bank account to get started. And we don't really talk about GPR anymore. We talk about Cash App, we talk about Chime, we talk about all these other digital banks that are coming. And I think that's an example where the government did their best to kind of prevent taking advantage of the LMI community, but the markets came in and actually provided them something that was actually in their interest. And I think Cash App is not something that just that Square should be proud of. It's something this industry should be proud of, given the demographic that it's serving and how well it's serving.
Well, there you have it.
Available on the App Store today.
Cash App me some money later on? Cash App me some money for saying that later on?
I'll cash you something after this. So just to pull it back over to countries that are far more advanced than us, what is your perspective on that? Not just Sweden, obviously China, and then there's countries like Japan who are cash only predominantly, and they don't seem like they're going to change anytime soon. When you look at the rest of the world and the advancements in each of those countries, what are your thoughts?
I guess my thoughts are it is a very large experiment, and we're seeing different people take that experiment on in different ways with different results. You look at what's going on in India, and you look at the experiment that they did in getting rid of their high-value bills. There are a lot of people who would argue that did not work out as well as they were expecting. You look at Sweden, obviously, you mentioned that one. I think in the United States, it's also an experiment. But we have one of the most heterogeneous societies of all of the countries that you happen to have just mentioned. And as a result, you also have a lot of income differentials, and you have a lot of problems to solve for different demographics, right? If you think about the network effects of digital payments are not available with cash. And I think that's something that ought to be discussed. And that's something where if you look at any other system, you can think about vaccines, if you think about mobile adoption, the last mile, when you actually close that last mile, when you actually run that last mile, and you bring in the rest of the group into that picture, the network effects become extraordinary. So now all of a sudden, if you have mobile phone adoption right now I think we're at about 80% in the United States, You get to 100%, all of a sudden, the data you get is different. The network effects of the data, the network effects of merchant offers, right? I can't offer a merchant offer to somebody who's paying cash using data from their transactions because I don't have the data. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of let's try to get 100% adoption on the mobile side as well as on the digital payment side, and I think we'll see a much bigger network effect.
Yeah, and I think looking at countries, outside of our own borders to see what's happening. I mean, you look at what's happened in China, right, with the adoption of mobile payments, right? I mean, in just a 3-year period, it's gone up to 89.6%. I made that up. Y'all can check that. But I mean, it is a massive number, right, that you're seeing that in a very short period of time, and just not stuck to the cities on the coast, right? I mean, it's the wave has gone across. But you can also step on yourself just saying, well, we could lift that and that's going to work here. Right? I mean, we've seen that over and over again. Solutions that work in some markets do not work in others. M-Pesa being a great example of that. M-Pesa, especially what it was focused on and the success they had. But I remember, if I'm not mistaken, the M-Pesa rollout in South Africa did not go over that well. They actually tried to roll out M-Pesa in Romania. Absolutely bombed. And it didn't take off. So there's danger in that too, just looking right onto the technology side of it. But I am personally, I'm a huge proponent of this. Because this device, well, not the Apple iPhone, that's bad. There's other versions of this, but the concept around the mobile phone and what it can bring, and what it can do on the financial lives of individuals. You look at solutions like Tala. I'll give Tala a shout out. The micro lending and what it's able to do with very simple devices, to me is a great example, and it's going outside of cash for those loans that it's able to do to improve people's lives.
And I think that obviously mobile adoption is incredibly, we're reliant on that in order to advance digital banking as we move forward. But I also think if you look at Sweden, even outside of just technology, there is trust there. Trust in the banks, trust in the government. Whereas in the US, I'm not quite sure that's there anymore.
And if I can add, especially for communities, right, who have been traditionally marginalized via redlining or bank deserts, right? I mean, that's going to be a hard-won gain, a trust that's hard-won.
Yeah, and I think that it's almost we're before you can even advance the technology, we also there's a foundation that's missing, which is that. And I don't have the answer, but how do we continue to build that trust with consumers as we move forward in the age of data breaches?
Yeah, so let me share a thought or two here. I think a couple of things. First of all, you see whether it's the tech giants or some of the new digital banks, they're establishing trust in a new kind of relationship because the first thing that they're doing is not necessarily money, right? Maybe it's ride sharing, maybe it's hosting your house on Airbnb or something of that nature. So they're establishing trust in one context, and so as they move to another context called payments, how do they migrate and port that trust over? And I think you're going to have and we're seeing this quite a bit, a much easier time building trust in that respect versus a bank who's basically all about money. And I think for the lower middle income community, it's about taking your money. Yeah. Right? So I think that's one. But I think secondly, and we spend a lot of time at Marqeta thinking about this, which is reliability. Right? You have got to be up, you have got to be reliable, you have got to be there when people need their money. It's very different if Slack goes down for a few minutes versus if cash goes down or some other thing. You've got to be able to be there. And then I think probably the third thing is the social component. The trust happens between people. Between human beings. And we learn about something new from a friend, from a family member that we already trust, and then we try it out, and then we go through the adoption curve. And I think the more that the technology community and the financial services and fintech community can understand that and can build products that are actually human-centric versus technology-centric, you're going to see that trust factor go up.
And if I can just second that we've just actually done a survey of our customers because of all of the support that we do to try to help the migration from their flip phones to smartphones, helping them download their bank apps, as an example. And that was actually the number one way that people found new products and services was through friends and family, through a personal recommendation.
Yeah, and May, I think you brought up a very good point early on. That's probably one of the most important points, which is the awareness side of it, right? And which goes across all sides, right? It can be with the city government, whether it's in New York, right? The regulators, the tech companies themselves, and then the individuals that you service, that all of them are brought to the table and have a voice and they understand what the impact is of this. Like you said that in the study early on with Square, right? That a lot of the merchants you talked to really had no idea this was even a debate. Open banking, so my company's based out of London, open banking, you'll read about it constantly. You go out, most of the public, they have no clue what you're talking about. Not an inkling of what open banking is. So I do think it goes back to communication, awareness, and education.
Well, we've got 3 minutes and they're going to shut off our mics, just like at the Academy Awards when you have the speech, they just shut you down. But I did want to ask really quickly your perspective. Do you think the US will become a cashless society? Why or why not? In 2 minutes and 54 seconds, go.
Not in our lifetime. There's no way my dad is getting rid of the billfold that he carries around, and we all know this story, and I'm sure we can all relate to that. Not going to happen in our lifetime. Cash is going to go from 30% of transactions way down, but we're going to see it all over the place for years to come.
I think it could, but it would really require so much more holistic thoughtfulness than we're giving it now. If it was an element of, let's say, a national movement and support towards maybe like postal banking, or like a digital wallet or currency, like as a utility, then I could see us getting there. But it would be around a real dedication to a financial inclusion.
Sam?
We still write checks.
Yeah.
I swear to God, not me, but people still write checks, for God's sakes. Can we kill those first and then worry about cash?
Totally true. Well, we actually have more time. Wow, I'm shocked by that. Are there things that the Financial Clinic is doing right now that you're working with different either technology groups or companies that you think that you're on the front lines of this, of how to make some change?
Demetra, thank you so much for asking.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, so our fintech is actually building out a marketplace. So an algorithm that we're building in the platform where 500 social service practitioners, 15,000 practitioners of 500 nonprofit organizations from around the country support the financial security of their communities. And we are building an algorithm for which we will be able to access the baseline data, age, their household composition, their budget, their financial goal, I think, which is so key. And then we will be able to cross-reference that with a variety of products and services to help facilitate the process to financial security.
That's amazing.
For 75,000 customers and growing.
That's amazing. Well, anything, Sam, to end?
Really good answer. Good.
I think that's it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone. That was fantastic. The cashless debate.